The autumn dust of Cedar Ridge, Montana, swirled around Clara Mitchell's worn boots as she navigated the uneven wooden sidewalk outside Henderson's general store. Each step sent a sharp reminder through her left leg, a souvenir from the farming accident that had claimed her childhood dreams and, it seemed, her future. The limp that followed her everywhere had become as much a part of her identity as her chestnut hair or green eyes, though far less welcomed. "Look at her go," Martha Henderson whispered to her customer, not bothering to lower her voice. "Poor thing can barely make it down the street. What man would want to burden himself with that?" Clara's fingers tightened around the small bundle of letters she carried, rejections from teaching positions in neighboring towns. At 26, she had exhausted nearly every opportunity within traveling distance, her credentials overshadowed by the visible reminder of her limitations. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as Clara made her way toward the post office, each uneven step accompanied by the familiar symphony of hushed conversations that seemed to follow her everywhere. Mrs. Garrett from the boarding house averted her eyes while young Tommy Fletcher openly stared until his mother yanked him away with a sharp, "Don't gawk, Thomas." "Afternoon, Miss Mitchell," called out Sheriff Davidson, tipping his hat with genuine kindness. He was one of the few townspeople who treated her with consistent respect, though even his politeness couldn't shield her from the weight of constant scrutiny. "Good afternoon, Sheriff," Clara replied, managing a small smile. She had learned to carry herself with as much dignity as possible, knowing that any sign of self-pity would only fuel the town's conviction that she was indeed damaged goods. As she approached the post office steps, always a particular challenge, Clara noticed a tall figure in work clothes loading supplies into a weathered pickup truck. Samuel Hartwell stood with his back to the street, his broad shoulders speaking of years spent working the land. His farm lay 5 miles outside town, far enough that their paths rarely crossed, though she knew his story. Widowed 3 years ago when his wife succumbed to pneumonia, left to raise his 8-year-old daughter Emma alone. Clara had just placed her foot on the first step when her leg buckled slightly, causing her to grab the railing for support. The movement was small, barely noticeable to most, but it was enough to send her letters scattering across the wooden planks. "Ma, look at the crippled lady," a child's voice rang out, followed by the sharp reprimand of an embarrassed parent. Heat flooded Clara's cheeks as she knelt to gather the scattered papers, her movements awkward and hurried. The familiar sting of tears threatened, but she had, long ago, learned to swallow such moments of vulnerability. She reached for the last letter, another rejection from the schoolhouse in Millfield, just as a pair of work-worn hands appeared beside hers. "Allow me," came a quiet voice. Clara looked up to find Samuel Hartwell crouched beside her, his weather-lined face serious but kind. His eyes, the color of winter sky, met hers without the usual mixture of pity and discomfort she had grown accustomed to seeing. "Thank you," she murmured, accepting the letters he handed her. "These steps can be treacherous," he said simply, rising and offering her his hand. "Built in 1847, and I don't think they've been properly maintained since." There was no condescension in his voice, no special tone reserved for the town's unfortunate souls. He spoke to her as he might speak to anyone, about something as mundane as poorly maintained steps. Clara accepted his assistance, surprised by the steadiness of his grip. "Mr. Hartwell, isn't it? I'm Clara Mitchell." "Samuel," he corrected. "And I know who you are, Miss Mitchell. You taught my Emma's friend Lucy before the Thompsons moved to Billings. Lucy spoke very highly of your lessons." The simple acknowledgement of her professional abilities, something beyond her physical limitations, caught Clara off guard. That's very kind of you to say." Samuel nodded toward the letters in her hand. "Still teaching?" "Looking for positions," Clara admitted, then immediately wondered why she had been so honest with a virtual stranger. "Shame," Samuel said, adjusting his hat against the afternoon glare. "Good teachers are hard to find. Emma's been struggling with her reading since we lost her mother. I'm afraid I'm not much help in that department." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them as the implications of his words settled. Clara had heard whispers about Samuel's difficulties managing both farm and fatherhood. though the town gossips were generally more sympathetic to his struggles than to hers. "I should let you get on with your errands," Clara said finally, clutching her letters. "Miss Mitchell," Samuel called as she turned toward the post office door. When she looked back, he seemed to be weighing his words carefully. "If you ever find yourself with some free time, Emma could use help with her studies. I could pay a fair wage." The offer hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and danger. Clara understood the delicate social dynamics of Cedar Ridge well enough to know that a single woman spending time alone with a widowed man would set tongues wagging from here to the county line. I'll consider it," she heard herself saying. Samuel touched the brim of his hat. "That's all I can ask. Good day, Miss Mitchell." As his truck rumbled away down Main Street, Clara stood on the post office steps, watching until it disappeared around the bend toward the farming district. For the first time in months, perhaps years, someone had offered her work based on her abilities rather than in spite of her limitations. The afternoon shadows grew longer as Clara finally entered the post office, her mind churning with possibilities and concerns. Mrs. Patterson behind the counter barely looked up from her newspaper, though Clara caught her glancing at the letters with undisguised curiosity. "More applications?" Mrs. Patterson asked with false sympathy. "Yes," Clara replied simply, unwilling to provide fodder for the town's gossip network. Walking home to her small rented room above the millinery shop, Clara found herself thinking not about the rejection letters or the cruel comments, but about the steady kindness in Samuel Hartwell's eyes. She thought about his daughter Emma, struggling with reading in the wake of losing her mother. She thought about the quiet respect in his voice when he spoke of good teachers being hard to find. That evening, as Clara sat by her window watching the sun set over the Montana plains, she made a decision that would change the course of her life. Tomorrow she would walk the 5 miles to the Hartwell farm. Not because she was desperate for work, though she was, but because for the first time in years, someone had seen her as capable rather than broken. The town of Cedar Ridge had made its judgment about Clara Mitchell long ago, but perhaps, she thought as she carefully folded her letters and placed them in her bureau drawer, it was time she stopped living down to their expectations and started living up to her own possibilities. The morning air carried the crispness of early November as Clara set out for the Hartwell farm. Her decision crystallized overnight into quiet determination. She had risen before dawn, pressed her best dress, and prepared a small satchel with basic teaching materials salvaged from her previous positions. The 5-mile walk would be challenging, but she had learned long ago to work within her limitations, rather than surrender to them. The dusty main road gave way to a dirt path that wound through golden wheat fields and past weathered fence posts. With each step away from town, Clara felt some of the constant tension in her shoulders begin to ease. Out here, there were no whispered conversations or pitying glances, only the vast Montana sky and the rhythmic sound of her footsteps on packed earth. The Hartwell farm appeared gradually, first as a smudge of buildings against the horizon, then resolving into a modest but well-maintained homestead. The white farmhouse, though in need of fresh paint, sat solidly among mature oak trees. A red barn dominated the yard, flanked by chicken coops and a vegetable garden that showed signs of recent harvest. Everything spoke of hard work and careful stewardship, if not abundance. As Clara approached the front porch, the screen door opened to reveal a small girl with Samuel's serious gray eyes and honey-colored braids that hung past her shoulders. Emma Hartwell regarded the visitor with the solemn curiosity of a child who had learned early that the world could be unpredictable. "Papa," Emma called over her shoulder. "There's a lady here." Samuel emerged from the house, wiping his hands on a dish towel. His expression shifted from surprise to something approaching relief when he recognized Clara. "Miss Mitchell," he said, stepping onto the porch. "I wasn't certain you'd come." "I said I would consider it," Clara replied, suddenly feeling foolish for making the long walk without first confirming the arrangement. "I hope I haven't presumed too much." "Not at all." Samuel's voice carried genuine warmth. "Emma, this is Miss Mitchell. She's a teacher." Emma stepped closer to her father's side, studying Clara with unguarded interest. "You walk funny." she observed with a child's characteristic directness. Emma, Samuel warned gently. It's quite all right, Clara said, crouching to bring herself closer to Emma's eye level. I hurt my leg when I was younger, so I walk differently than most people, but it doesn't stop me from doing the things I love, like teaching. Does it hurt? Sometimes, Clara answered honestly, but not as much as it used to. Emma nodded gravely, as if this explanation satisfied some internal logic. Papa says I need help with reading because I'm not very smart. That's not what I said, Samuel interjected quickly, a flush coloring his neck. I said reading doesn't come easy to everyone, and that's perfectly normal. Clara looked up at Samuel, recognizing the exhaustion of a parent struggling to meet all his child's needs. Your father is absolutely right, Emma. Some people are naturally good at reading, others at mathematics, still others at growing things or building with their hands. We all have different gifts. What's my gift? Emma asked immediately. Clara considered this seriously, her eyes taking in the child's intelligent expression and the careful way she had observed the interaction between adults. I think you might be good at understanding people. You notice things and ask thoughtful questions. That's a very special gift. Emma beamed, and Samuel's expression softened noticeably. Would you like to come inside? Samuel offered. I have coffee on, and Emma can show you her books. The interior of the farmhouse was clean but sparse, furnished with pieces that spoke of practicality over decoration. A large kitchen dominated the main floor, its windows offering views of the surrounding fields. Emma led Clara to a small table, near the window where a handful of children's books lay scattered alongside a slate and chalk. These are my reading books, Emma explained, her earlier shyness evaporating. But the words get all mixed up sometimes. Clara picked up one of the primers, noting the advanced level compared to what most 8-year-olds typically managed. Has anyone tested your eyes, Emma? Samuel paused in pouring coffee. Her eyes. She's never complained of trouble seeing. Sometimes reading difficulties can be related to how the eyes track across a page, Clara explained gently. There are simple exercises that can help, if that's the issue. You really think you can help her? Samuel asked, and Clara heard the hope he was trying to keep from his voice. I'd like to try, if Emma is willing. Emma nodded enthusiastically. Can we start now? Over the next hour, Clara worked with Emma using techniques she had developed during her years of teaching. She observed how the child approached text, noted where her eyes seemed to struggle, and began to form hypotheses about the root of the reading difficulties. Emma, Clara said finally, I want you to try something. Take this piece of paper and hold it up to cover everything on this page except for this one line. Emma followed the instruction, and immediately her reading became more fluid. The improvement was dramatic and instant. How did you know to do that? Samuel asked, his voice filled with wonder. Experience, Clara replied simply. I've seen similar challenges before. Emma's eyes are probably getting overwhelmed by too much text at once. If we teach her techniques to focus on one line at a time and gradually build up her visual stamina, I believe her reading will improve significantly. You mean I'm not stupid? Emma asked, her voice small. Clara's heart clenched at the question. You are absolutely not stupid, Emma. You're very intelligent. Your brain just processes information in its own special way. Samuel cleared his throat roughly. Miss Mitchell, we would be honored if you would consider working with Emma regularly. Name your price. Let's start with 3 afternoons a week, Clara suggested. We can see how it goes from there. As they discussed practical arrangements, Clara found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't experienced in years. The farmhouse kitchen, warmed by afternoon sunlight and filled with the comfortable sounds of domestic life, felt more welcoming than any place she had known since childhood. Miss Mitchell, Emma said as they concluded the impromptu lesson, will you stay for supper? Papa makes good soup. Samuel looked embarrassed. Emma, I'm sure Miss Mitchell has other obligations. Actually, Clara interrupted, I'd be delighted to stay if it's not too much trouble. No trouble at all, Samuel assured her. Though she caught the slight uncertainty in his voice that suggested he was as surprised by the invitation as she was by her acceptance. As Samuel busied himself with supper preparations and Emma chattered about her favorite stories, Clara felt something she had almost forgotten: the simple pleasure of belonging somewhere, even temporarily. The constant weight of judgment and speculation that followed her through Cedar Ridge was absent here, replaced by the comfortable rhythms of family life. When it came time to leave, Samuel insisted on driving her back to town in his truck, despite her protests that she was perfectly capable of walking. "It's getting dark," he said simply, "and it's no trouble." The ride back to Cedar Ridge was comfortable, filled with easy conversation about Emma's progress and the approaching winter. As they reached the edge of town, however, Clara became increasingly aware of the potential complications of their arrangement. "Mr. Hartwell," she said as he pulled up in front of the millinery shop, "perhaps it would be best if these lessons remained private. You know how people talk." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "Miss Mitchell, I understand your concern, but Emma needs help and you're clearly qualified to provide it. What people choose to say about that is their business, not ours." His quiet confidence was both reassuring and unsettling. Clara had spent so many years managing other people's perceptions that the idea of simply not caring what they thought felt revolutionary and terrifying in equal measure. "I'll see you Wednesday afternoon then," she said, gathering her satchel. "We'll both be looking forward to it," Samuel replied. As Clara climbed the narrow stairs to her room, she could hear Mrs. Whitman, the millinery shop owner, moving around below. Tomorrow, she knew, there would be questions about the truck that had dropped her off, about where she had spent her day, about the nature of her business with the widowed farmer. But for tonight, Clara allowed herself to simply savor the memory of Emma's delighted laughter when the reading exercises worked, the warmth of Samuel's kitchen, and the unfamiliar sensation of being valued for what she could give, rather than pitied for what she lacked. Change was coming to her carefully ordered world, and for the first time in years, Clara found herself looking forward to whatever tomorrow might bring. 3 weeks into Clara's arrangement with the Hartwell family, Emma's progress had exceeded everyone's expectations. The little girl who had struggled to read simple sentences was now devouring children's stories with growing confidence, her face lighting up with each successful passage. Clara found herself looking forward to her Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday afternoons at the farm, with an anticipation that both thrilled and worried her. The November air had turned sharp, carrying the promise of winter, as Clara made her usual trek to the farmhouse. She had fallen into a comfortable routine, arriving at 1 o'clock, working with Emma until 4, then often staying for supper when Samuel's gentle insistence overcame her polite protests. Today, however, felt different from the moment she approached the porch. Emma met her at the door with unusual excitement. "Miss Clara, Papa says you can stay the whole weekend if you want. There's a big storm coming." Clara's heart skipped as she looked past Emma to where Samuel stood in the kitchen doorway, his expression serious but hopeful. "The weather reports are calling for a significant blizzard," Samuel explained, his voice carefully neutral. "Starting tonight and lasting through Sunday. The roads could be impassable." Clara understood the implications immediately. Staying overnight at the farm would cross a line that the good people of Cedar Ridge would never forgive. But looking at the darkening sky and feeling the bite of wind that cut through her wool coat, she also understood the practical reality of Montana weather. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully. "But perhaps I should head back to town before the weather worsens." "Miss Clara, please stay," Emma pleaded, tugging at her skirt. "We could read the whole book about the princess and Papa could make his special pancakes for breakfast." Samuel's eyes met Clara's over his daughter's head. "It's your choice, of course, but I'd feel better knowing you were safe here rather than caught in a storm." The first snowflakes began falling as Clara weighed her options. She could attempt the 5-mile walk back to town and hope to outrun the weather. Or she could accept Samuel's hospitality and face whatever social consequences awaited her. "If you're certain it's no imposition," she heard herself saying, "I would be grateful for the shelter." Emma's whoop of delight was immediately followed by a crash of thunder that seemed to shake the farmhouse. Within an hour, the gentle snowfall had transformed into a howling blizzard that turned the world outside the windows into a wall of white. Good thing you decided to stay, Samuel observed, stoking the fire in the main room's stone fireplace. This looks to be a bad one. Clara settled into a chair near the warmth, Emma curled beside her with a book of fairy tales. The domestic scene felt both natural and dangerous, too comfortable, too much like the family life she had long ago accepted would never be hers. "Papa," Emma said during a lull in the storm's fury, "why doesn't Miss Clara have a family of her own?" The question hung in the air like smoke from the fireplace. Samuel paused in his wood stacking, his shoulders tense. "Emma, that's not a polite question to ask," he said gently. "It's all right," Clara replied, though her voice sounded strained even to her own ears. "I suppose I never found the right person, Emma. Sometimes life doesn't work out the way we plan." "But you're nice and smart and pretty," Emma insisted with a child's straightforward logic. "Why wouldn't someone want to marry you?" Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Well, you see, some people think that because I walk differently I wouldn't make a good wife or mother." "That's stupid," Emma declared with 8-year-old conviction. "Emma," Samuel warned, but his tone lacked real censure. "It is stupid, Papa. Miss Clara is the best teacher ever, and she makes the best stories, and she doesn't get mad when I ask lots of questions. Anyone would be lucky to have her for a mama." The innocence and fierce loyalty in Emma's voice made Clara's throat tight with emotion. She glanced at Samuel and was startled to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "Thank you, sweetheart," Clara managed. "That's the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me." The evening passed peacefully, with Emma eventually falling asleep beside Clara on the sofa, her head pillowed against the teacher's shoulder. Samuel gently carried his daughter upstairs while Clara banked the fire and tidied the kitchen, moving through the domestic tasks with an ease that felt both foreign and familiar. "She's gotten attached to you," Samuel observed when he returned downstairs. "The feeling is mutual," Clara admitted. "She's a remarkable child, Samuel. You should be very proud." "It's not easy, raising her alone," he said quietly, settling into the chair across from her. "Some days I feel like I'm failing her completely." "You're not failing her," Clara said firmly. "Emma is bright, kind, curious, and well-mannered. Those don't happen by accident." Samuel was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "My wife, Sarah, she had all the maternal instincts, knew just what to say, what to do. I'm just making it up as I go along." "We all are," Clara replied softly. "Even mothers, even teachers. We just hope we're doing more good than harm." Their conversation continued late into the night, ranging from Emma's education to farm management, from books they had read to dreams they had harbored. Clara found herself sharing thoughts and feelings she hadn't voiced to anyone in years, while Samuel revealed depths of intelligence and sensitivity that the taciturn farmer had kept hidden beneath his quiet exterior. It was nearly midnight when Samuel finally suggested they should both get some rest. "You can take my room," he offered. "I'll sleep down here by the fire." "I couldn't possibly," Clara began. "It's the warmest room in the house," Samuel interrupted gently. "And the bed is comfortable, I insist." Clara accepted graciously, though. Lying in Samuel's bed, surrounded by his scent and the intimate details of his private life, made sleep elusive. She found herself staring at the ceiling, acutely aware of his presence downstairs and the dangerous territory her heart was beginning to explore. The storm raged for 2 full days, trapping them in a cocoon of enforced domesticity. Clara helped with household tasks, continued Emma's lessons, and found herself settling into the rhythms of farm life with surprising ease. Samuel treated her as an equal partner in managing the temporary crisis, consulting her about Emma's needs and accepting her help with practical tasks without the careful courtesy that usually marked their interactions. By Sunday evening, when the storm finally exhausted itself, Clara realized she had experienced something she had never expected to find: a sense of home. The 3 of them had functioned as a unit, each contributing according to their abilities, each valued for what they brought to the whole. Monday morning dawned clear and brutally cold, with snow drifted to the windowsills. Samuel hitched his strongest horse to the sleigh, and prepared to drive Clara back to town, both of them understanding without discussion that the weekend's intimacy would have to be carefully packaged and hidden from Cedar Ridge's judgmental eyes. "Will you still come for Emma's lessons?" Samuel asked as they prepared to leave. "Of course," Clara assured him, though she felt a pang of anxiety about returning to her regular life after the weekend's revelations. The ride back to town was subdued, both of them lost in private thoughts. As they approached Cedar Ridge's main street, Clara became aware of curtains twitching in windows and faces peering out to observe their arrival. The significance of her overnight absence would not be lost on the town's gossip network. Samuel pulled up in front of the millinery shop, his expression grim as he helped Clara down from the sleigh. "Miss Mitchell," he said formally, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp air. "Thank you for helping with Emma during the storm. I'm grateful you were safe." Clara understood the performance for the benefit of watching eyes. "Thank you for the shelter, Mr. Hartwell. I'll see you Wednesday for Emma's regular lesson." As Samuel drove away, Clara became acutely aware of Mrs. Whitman watching from the shop window, her expression calculating. Before Clara could reach the stairs to her room, the older woman had stepped outside. "My goodness, Clara," Mrs. Whitman said with false concern. "We were so worried about you during the storm. However did you manage?" "I was fortunate to find shelter at the Hartwell farm," Clara replied evenly. "Mr. Hartwell was kind enough to ensure I wasn't caught in the blizzard." Mrs. Whitman's eyes gleamed with the anticipation of scandal. How thoughtful of him. "I'm sure his hospitality was most appreciated." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. She had been naive to think that a weekend's happiness wouldn't come with a price. "If you'll excuse me," she said quietly, "I need to prepare for the week ahead." As Clara climbed the stairs to her small room, she could already hear Mrs. Whitman's voice drifting through the building, no doubt beginning the process of transforming a simple act of neighborly assistance into something sordid and scandalous. Clara sat on her narrow bed, still wearing her coat, and stared out at the snow-covered street. The weekend at the farm had shown her a glimpse of the life she might have had, a life filled with purpose, belonging, and perhaps even love. But now, facing the inevitable consequences of her choices, she wondered if that glimpse would prove to be the cruelest gift of all. Outside, the town of Cedar Ridge began to wake up, and with it the machinery of judgment that would soon threaten to destroy the fragile sanctuary she had found with Samuel and Emma. The whispers began before Clara had finished her morning coffee. From her window above the millinery shop, she watched as knots of townspeople gathered on street corners, their conversations growing animated when her name was mentioned. Mrs. Patterson from the post office made 3 separate trips past the shop, each time craning her neck to peer upward, while Martha Henderson practically pressed her nose against the general store window to get a better view. By afternoon, the subtle campaign of innuendo had crystallized into open scandal. Clara learned this when she ventured out to purchase supplies for Emma's lessons, only to find herself subjected to a gauntlet of barely concealed hostility. "Well, well," Martha Henderson called out loudly as Clara entered the general store. "Look who's decided to show her face in polite society." Clara felt every eye in the store turn toward her, conversations halting mid-sentence. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Henderson," she replied with as much dignity as she could manage. "I suppose you think we're all fools," Martha continued, her voice pitched, "to carry throughout the store. Spending the weekend with a widowed man teaching his child playing house. We all know what you're really after." "Mrs. Henderson," Clara said quietly, "I was providing educational assistance to Emma Hartwell. Nothing more." "Educational assistance," Martha scoffed. "Is that what they're calling it these days? A decent woman would have found her way back to town before dark, storm or no storm." Clara felt her cheeks burn but forced herself to maintain composure. "Sometimes, circumstances beyond our control require us to make practical decisions." "Practical," repeated Mrs. Patterson, who had mysteriously appeared in the store. "That's one word for it. Though most of us would use different language to describe a woman who throws herself at the first man who shows her kindness. The accusations hung in the air like poison. Clara gathered her purchases with trembling hands, acutely aware that every person. Clara's heart lifted despite her troubles. "That's wonderful, Emma. I can't wait to hear about it." Samuel appeared on the porch, his expression more guarded than usual. "Miss Mitchell," he said formally, "I wasn't certain you would come today." "Gave my word," Clara replied, though she noticed the careful distance he maintained between them. Inside the farmhouse, Emma's excitement was infectious as she demonstrated her improved reading skills. For a brief time, Clara allowed herself to forget the town's judgment and focus on the joy of teaching a child who was finally discovering the magic of books. It was Samuel who broached the subject neither adult wanted to address. "Emma, why don't you go gather eggs for supper?" he suggested gently. Once they were alone, Samuel turned to Clara with obvious reluctance. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to know I hate having to do it." Clara's stomach tightened. "Of course. People in town, they're talking about you staying here during the storm, about what it might mean." Samuel's jaw worked as he struggled with the words. "I need to know if continuing these lessons is going to cause you problems." Clara looked around the kitchen that had become so familiar, so welcoming. "It already has caused problems, Samuel, but that doesn't mean I'm willing to stop coming. Maybe it would be better, for your reputation, if we found Emma a different teacher." The suggestion hit Clara like a physical blow. "Is that what you want?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched at his sides. "What I want and what might be best for everyone involved are two different things." "Then tell me what you want," Clara pressed, surprising herself with her boldness. Samuel met her eyes directly. "I want you to keep teaching Emma. I want you to stay for supper and tell us stories and laugh at Emma's jokes. I want—" He stopped himself abruptly. "What do you want, Samuel?" "I want things I have no right to want," he said quietly. "Things that would ruin your reputation completely if people knew." Clara felt her heart racing. "What if I don't care about my reputation anymore?" Samuel stared at her for a long moment. "You should care. A woman alone in a place like Cedar Ridge needs the community's respect to survive." "I've never had their respect," Clara replied with sudden clarity. "They've tolerated me at best, pitied me at worst. I spent years trying to earn something that was never going to be offered freely. Maybe it's time I stopped caring about their approval." Emma's return with a basket of eggs interrupted the charged moment, but the conversation continued in glances and subtle touches throughout the evening. When it came time for Clara to leave, Samuel again insisted on driving her home despite her protests. "Let them talk," he said grimly. "If we're going to be accused regardless, we might as well ensure you arrive safely." The ride back to town was tense with unspoken possibilities. As they reached Main Street, Clara noticed more people than usual on the sidewalks for a Wednesday evening, their attention obviously focused on the approaching truck. Samuel pulled up in front of the millinery shop and turned to face Clara directly. "I need you to know something before you get out of this truck." Clara waited, her heart hammering. What happened between us this weekend, the conversations, the comfort, the way it felt like we might be a family, none of that was pretend for me. If circumstances were different, if this town was different, I would be asking you to consider sharing that life permanently. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Samuel, but I won't ask you to sacrifice everything for a chance at happiness that might destroy us both. The choice has to be yours." Clara looked out at the faces watching them from windows and doorways, then back at Samuel's earnest, worried expression. "What if I've already made my choice? Then God help us both," Samuel replied softly. Clara leaned across the truck's bench seat and, in full view of anyone who cared to watch, placed her hand over Samuel's. "Some things are worth fighting for, Samuel Hartwell. Some people are worth standing up to the whole world for." Samuel's breath caught. "Clara, I'll see you Saturday for Emma's lesson," she said firmly. "And Samuel, next time there's a storm coming, I won't wait for an invitation to stay." Clara climbed down from the truck and walked steadily toward the millinery shop, her spine straight and her chin raised. Behind her, she heard Samuel's truck rumble away, but she didn't turn to watch him go. Instead, she focused on the faces in the windows, the whispered conversations, the shocked expressions of people who had clearly witnessed her public declaration. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Clara heard Mrs. Whitman's voice below. "Did you see that shameless display? Right there in the middle of Main Street." Clara paused at the top of the stairs, then did something she had never done in her years of living above the millinery shop. She walked back down and faced Mrs. Whitman, directly. "Mrs. Whitman," Clara said calmly, "I want you to know that Samuel Hartwell is the finest man I've ever known. He's kind, honorable, and devoted to his daughter. If this town chooses to see something shameful in that, the shame belongs to you, not to him." Mrs. Whitman's mouth fell open in shock. "Furthermore," Clara continued, "I will continue teaching Emma and visiting their home as often as they'll have me. If that troubles you, I suggest you find more worthwhile concerns to occupy your time." With that, Clara turned and climbed the stairs, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. She had crossed a